Well, we've had some first show difficulties, but we are back here. We welcome you back here to Sports Now. I'm Jackson Lycap, joined with my colleague Matthew Pennington. It is our first show in the new format, 5 days a week, Sports Now coming to you live. And within this new format, Matt, remember, we are still trying to work out some kinks and stuff like that in the new McAfee Heating and Air Studios, the TKDS Sports Network studio. But nonetheless, we're back. We're live. I can't believe it's only fitting that our first show in this new 5 a day a week format is we have technical difficulties that occur 3 minutes before the show.
It's not just that, it's the fact that it seems like no matter where we go, whether it be a football game, whether it be a basketball game, whether it be softball, baseball, anything, it seems like if it's you and me, Jackson, going to it, there just always has to be one issue that comes up for absolutely no reason whatsoever, because the following week, that issue doesn't come up, but another one decides to pop up. So we did get everything fixed. Everything's good to go. So it's a little bit later of a starting time than we were anticipating. We're about 5-10 minutes behind, but we got it going. We're good.
Well, folks, we've had a rough start, but welcome to the new Sports Now format. 5 days a week. We'll be live Monday through Wednesday from 4 to 6. And then on Thursday, a special edition show for the time being for the OHSAA playoff show. And we'll go across, talk about all the brackets. We'll prep the OHSAA football playoffs coming up from 4 to 7 on Thursday. And then, of course, our Saturday morning show, 8 to 11, where we recap all of the Friday night football action. 5 days a week. I think we're good now.
I mean, we've been talking about it.
It was a little stressful for a few minutes.
We've been talking about this for the past few months, and I've been waiting for us to get everything set up in the studio, getting everything ready to go. So I'm pumped to get this show on the road.
Well, let's get this show started. We're going to take one small break, brought to you by this message from McAfee Heating and Air. When we return, we'll talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. They're back in the win column after a huge win last week in the desert.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, Matt, the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow described it yesterday or a couple of days ago that it was a must-win game for the Cincinnati Bengals to try to get back on track, starting off the season 1-3 overall, and a team that did not have an offensive first-half touchdown through their first 4 games of the season. Absolutely wild to think about. Joe Burrow, he was taken off the injury report late last week. He described yesterday's game in Arizona a must-win. That's exactly what Cincinnati came in and did. Defense got it done. Offense got it done. Special teams getting it done as well. And they end up taking down the Arizona Cardinals 34-20 to get back in the win column. And Matt, 2-3 for the Cincinnati Bengals. That is actually the same exact record they sat at last season after they lost their Week 5 matchup to Baltimore. They were 2-3 a year ago. They're 2-3 this season. History repeats itself. Remember, last season, the Bengals ended up in the AFC Championship.
Yeah, I think this year might be a little bit different, though, for Cincinnati, just because obviously Joe Burrow playing a lot better, but there's still not saying that it's going to happen. I don't want to see it happen being a Browns fan. I don't want to see any player get hurt, but you've got Joe Burrow coming off of a calf injury, obviously played phenomenally yesterday, 34 points for an offense that really didn't have an identity at all through the first 4 weeks of the season. There's not really any other way of putting it. But putting up 34 points in that game, taking down the Arizona Cardinals, it seemed like Cincy was a little bit of a different team yesterday against the Cardinals. So you can make that argument that at the start of the season last year, they might not have been the same team they were once they started going down the stretch of the regular season. We'll wait and see if that's going to be the case for the Bengals this year. But Joe Burrow, with that calf injury that he suffered during the preseason, not saying it's going to come back because it's very possible that he's fully healed from it and it's not going to be an issue. But you also have to have that in the back of your mind if you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, that Your quarterback came off an injury. He's starting to get better. He's continually getting better as the weeks go on. But we've also seen in weeks where he was back, him dealing with some lingering effects of that calf injury. So obviously it doesn't seem like that's really going to be a case that much, at least for now, for the regular season for Joe Burrow. But it's something that you also have to keep in the back of your mind as a Cincinnati Bengals fan that, yeah, we looked really good against the Cardinals, but one bad tackle, and that could all change.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, you described the first 4 weeks of the season for the Cincinnati Bengals that they had no offensive identity. In fact, their offensive identity was field goals or 3-and-outs. It seemed like nothing else in between, more 3-and-outs than field goals, obviously. But Zach Taylor said early in the season that it usually takes a team about 5 or 6 weeks or so to be able to start learning that team's identity. And now, obviously, Cincinnati, they've had the same playmakers for the last couple of years. They've had Jamar Chase for 3 years. They have had Burrow now for 4. They've had Higgins now for 4. They've had Boyd for, I believe this is his 8th year in the league. They've had Mixon for quite a while. They've had the same players for a while, but at the same time, defensives adjust. You do have some new additions, especially the tight end room, Irv Smith Jr., Samaje Perine not there. You're still trying to find that second running back to complement Joe Mixon. Obviously, yes, it's still going to take a matter of time to find that offense identity, and I'm sure that the calf injury to Joe Burrow did not help. But Burrow being able to scramble around in the pocket, make plays, throw the deep ball, actually able to plant and drive off that back foot, something we have not been able to see from him at all this season. We were able to get a glimpse of that yesterday, and whereas I don't think he's a 100% healthy, he's getting there. And the good thing, a win against Arizona, no major setbacks that we know of. He's going to go in healthier to Seattle. If he can escape that game, and if the Bengals can get back to 3-3 heading into their bye week, that gives Burrow an extra week of rest. We're going to see a 100% healthy Joe Burrow coming back against the San Francisco 49ers. But we can't get ahead of ourselves. The Bengals, they have to take care of business against a red-hot Seattle Seahawks team.
Yeah, and another thing you have to talk about when it comes to that Bengals win yesterday, you take a look at the win. It was by 14 points. Take a guess what the turnover margin was in the game. +2 for the Cincinnati Bengals. The defense, talking about that offense not really having much of an identity, they showed up yesterday. The offense, at least when it came to the passing game, that was really what we saw for Cincinnati not have too much success. Joe Burrow threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in the game. He did have 1 interception, but the defense also turned the ball over for the Bengals and got the ball back into the hands of the offense 3 times in that game. So not only did we see the Bengals offense start to get things going, but the Bengals defense is continuing to do what we've seen from the Cincinnati Bengals defense so far this season, getting turnovers, getting the ball back into the hands of the offense. And if you're the Cincinnati Bengals and you're getting the offense clicking like we saw against the Cardinals, you're going to love having those turnovers because you're going to put your offense back out on the field. You're going to put a red-hot offense back out onto the football field, and all that's going to do is add to more points for the team.
Joe Burrow, 36 of 46 throwing the football yesterday, 317 yards. First time he's gone over 300 yards this season. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. And an interception that is receiver slip. Nothing really Joe could have done about that. Joe Mixon on the ground. I love what he's been able to do running the football this season. No Samaje Perine. There were a lot of people out there. Remember the offseason that Joe Mixon had. There were a lot of people out there iffy on whether or not they should bring Joe Mixon back or say somebody like Samaje Perine. They went with Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon's been running the football tremendous for Cincinnati, and we're really starting to see a glimpse of what Joe Mixon can do when he runs hard, when he's not dancing around trying to find a hole. He just hits the hole hard, and it's paying off for the Cincinnati run game. That certainly has been a tremendous asset this season for Cincinnati and good sign moving forward. And then, of course, Matt, Jamar Chase set a new franchise record for most catches in a game with 15. He had 192 yards, 3 touchdowns. I'm sure all of you fantasy football lovers that have Jamar Chase on your team right now, I'm sure you are ecstatic about the game that he had.
Especially with what we saw from Jamar Chase when it came to fantasy football earlier on in the season. I'm just happy I didn't play anybody who had Jamar Chase this week after seeing that stat line. But like I said, when it comes down to this offense, the Bengals offense, we were making a joke about Jamar Chase in fantasy football. That goes to show how much of a change there has been. Not just the fact that Jamar Chase is scoring more points in fantasy football, but the fact that at the beginning of the season, one of the bigger playmakers for the Cincinnati Bengals, Jamar Chase, having little to no impact whatsoever through the first few weeks of the season. These past few weeks, though, Jamar Chase has been absolutely tearing up the football field, what we usually see from Jamar Chase on the season. So that goes to show that this Bengals offense is only continuing to improve. And you were talking about Joe Mixon. That's the one thing I like about his run style. If there's not much to be gained, he has so much speed out of the backfield. He can just turn it up to 10, go as fast as he can. He's going to get at least 3 yards on the carry. That's the one thing I do like about Joe Mixon's run style. If there's not a hole to run through, it's turn on the jets as fast as humanly possible and just go straight towards the offensive line, and I'm going to gain a few yards on the play. So you talk about Joe Mixon, it was only 3.2 yards per carry in the game against the Cardinals, but getting around 3 yards a carry isn't horrible, especially at the NFL level. So when it comes down to it, a great day on the ground for Joe Mixon. Only had 81 yards off of 25 carries, but still, like I said, that's over 3 yards a carry, so that's a pretty good day. But then, as we mentioned, Joe Burrow, over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, and that pick being an interception that really wasn't on Joe Burrow, which that's one thing that I've been an advocate for the longest time. If it's an interception that has nothing to do with the quarterback being the reason behind it, like a tipped pass, like we saw the pick 6 in game number 1 where Mahomes threw a pass to Kadarius Toney, it goes through his hands and it's a pick 6. That's going to go on the stat sheet as an interception, but personally, I don't like that being called an interception because that has nothing to do with the quarterback whatsoever.
You know, I saw something, and I know we're getting a little sidetracked here, but I saw something, this is probably a couple of years ago, but I saw something circling around online where somebody was trying to get a petition to have an interception stat category for wide receivers. If the ball tipped off their hands or if the interception was caused by the wide receiver, then it should go on the wide receiver. But we're getting off topic. Maybe we're saving that for another show down the line. But yeah, Cincinnati, they needed a win. They got it. 34-20, played great complementary football all the way through. Defense forcing 3 turnovers. Matt, the biggest thing, though, I saw, and they have to fix this before facing off against the Seattle Seahawks next week at home. They have got to fix this. They have got to tackle better. Their open field tackling was atrocious at points and parts of that game yesterday. They have got to get better at that moving forward if they want a chance to beat Seattle.
And yeah, that was one thing, at least you take a look back, me being a Browns fan, the one game I remember for the Cincinnati Bengals was Browns versus Bengals in week 1. There were so many different times that obviously Nick Chubb not playing anymore for the rest of the season hurts my soul to say that. But the amount of times where Nick Chubb should have been stopped in the backfield and he was able to dance around a little bit and then gain 7 or 8 yards on the carry, that's something that, especially with how good the rushing defense is for the Cincinnati Bengals, it shouldn't really be allowed, or I wouldn't say allowed or tolerated, but that shouldn't be happening. When a play is blown up in the backfield, there should not be any yards gained on the play. It should be a tackle on the backfield. Play should be done there. There shouldn't be an opportunity for the running back to bounce it back to the other side of the field, gain some yards that he really shouldn't. But open field tackling, if that's an issue for the Cincinnati Bengals, especially with some teams that we see in the NFL right now with how elusive some of their players can be, I'm looking at the San Francisco 49ers with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey. If you can't tackle those guys in space, the 49ers are going to do what they did last night and put up 40-plus points on your team. And then moving on to other teams, you've got teams like Philadelphia. They've got an elusive team overall. I mean, Devonta Smith, you saw what he was able to do in college. He's been doing that a little bit in the NFL as well. But when it comes down to it, if that's an issue for the Cincinnati Bengals, you've got to try to tackle that either going into the game against Seattle, because Seattle's another team that's got some elusive playmakers on that side of on their offensive side of the football. But if you don't end up fixing that issue by this next week, I think that's going to be one of the main focal points that we see the Bengals try to tackle on their bye week.
I see what you did there.
Exactly.
Nice
You
little
caught that.
pun
You caught it.
intended.
You caught it.
I see what you did there. And, you know, Matt, you hit it spot on. And that problem for Cincinnati is going to fade as the season goes on. Once the players are, because remember, it's only week 5. I mean, week 5, there's still a long season ahead. Obviously, it helps not to be 1-4 or 0-5 at this point of the season. But there's such a long season ahead. And remember, you've only really been playing for a little over a month, especially Cincinnati, who rested their starters during the preseason, just like they did previous couple of seasons. So the tackling, I think, will get sorted out when the more game time that these players get. The more game time that these players get, the tackling issue will be resolved. The question is, how fast can they fix it? And when they fix it, will it be too late? Because 3-3 at the bye week sounds a lot better than 2-4 at the bye week.
Yeah, and if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, I mean, I wouldn't say that if you're sitting at 2-4 after the bye week, it's over when it comes to potentially being a number 1 seed in the AFC. But I'll tell you what, if it looks like a sloppy game for Cincinnati, then they're going to need to hit that bye week hard to get ready for their next 2 games afterwards. Because their next games after the game against the Seattle
Tough
Seahawks,
ones.
San Francisco 49ers on the road. Honestly, this is me just being honest. With how good the 49ers look, I think that even if the Bengals blow the Seahawks out 45-0,
I don't think anybody can beat the 49ers right now.
I think the only team that can go toe-to-toe with the 49ers right now is the Eagles. I think that's the only team that really, them and the Chiefs. I think Eagles, Chiefs are probably the only team that can really do anything to the San Francisco 49ers. So when it comes down to it, if you're the Bengals, obviously you want to go into the bye week 3-3. But if you don't, you better hit that bye week pretty hard, because you've got 49ers, then you've got the Bills, then you've got an easier game than those two, but this team, I think, is a little bit of a sleeper team right now. You got the Texans immediately after. It is a home game for the Bengals, so I see them winning that game. And then you've got a road game against the Ravens. Those are the 4 games directly after the bye week. So if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, it's a home game against the Seahawks. You don't have to deal with the 12th man. That's one good thing. You don't have to deal with that crowd up in Seattle, but you're facing off against the red-hot Seattle Seahawks team. If you can get that win, it's going to give you some confidence. If the Bengals get a big win against the Seahawks, I don't see them beating the 49ers. Like I said, I mean, it's on the road, and you're facing off against one of the more difficult teams to play in the NFL right now. But if the Bengals get a big win, I think that can play into pretty decent wins against the Bills, pretty decent win against the Texans, close, if not a pretty decent win against the Ravens after that. But if it's a sloppy win, they win 23-20, or they end up losing to the Seahawks, I'm not saying the Bengals are going to lose to the Bills or the Ravens or the Texans, but you get the feeling that it's going to be tougher in those games.
And, you know, Matt, one thing that I think I mentioned to you when we were on the phone with each other last night, the Cincinnati Bengals, their next 5 games, their next 6 weeks, tough stretch. The Bengals, if they can go 3-2 within those 5 games, that will put them at 5-5 heading into the backstretch of the season with, I don't want to say an easy schedule, because you still have to play Cleveland again. You still have to play Pittsburgh twice. You still have to end up playing the Kansas City Chiefs, the Vikings, and I'm still high on the Vikings. They're 1-4. Don't let that record fool you, because that's still a good team. That is still a very good team. 1-4. They've had a tough start to the season. And actually, if there's any team that's below 500 right now that I think can turn it around the most, I think it's Minnesota Vikings. But we're getting into that here a little bit later on in the show. You have a very tough schedule still, but it lightens up. So if you can get to 3-2 in your next 5 games, you'll be 5-5 with a schedule that is easing up. You could make a push for a playoff. And not only that, but a division at the top of the AFC North once again. They've won the AFC North the last couple of seasons. They could go for a three-peat if they can get to 5-5 on the season. They have to win 3 out of their next 5 games. An ideal situation, they pick up one that they're not supposed to win. They can pick up a game against the 49ers that they end up winning. And hopefully, maybe we could see Cincinnati go 4-1 during that stretch. That'll put them at 6-4 moving into the back end of the season. If that happens, I think Cincinnati will be at a good spot. I think they'll be at a good place, but it all has to start this upcoming Sunday, because you and I both know that schedule that's on the horizon for the Cincinnati Bengals. They have to take care of business. They have got to go into the bye week 3-3, or else that is going to make that 4-game stretch a whole lot harder if they drop this one to Seattle.
And yeah, you talk about down the stretch, if there's a game that the Bengals win that when you take a look at going into it, they shouldn't. I think if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, the game you want that to be is the game against the 49ers. If you can take down the 49ers and you're the Bengals, I don't think it matters what team you're facing after that. I think this can be said for any team that faces off against the 49ers throughout the remainder of this season, unless it's week 16 where there's not many games you have left afterwards. But if you're a team facing off against the 49ers early to midway through the season like the Cincinnati Bengals are, and you end up winning, that's going to give you confidence, and it's going to put in your mind that we can beat anybody. We can beat anybody on our schedule. We don't have to look at the Buffalo Bills game coming up next week and think, yeah, we should win this game, but it's Buffalo. We've seen what Diggs has been able to do. We've seen what Allen's been able to do the past few weeks. If you take down the 49ers, you're going to have that confidence going into the Bills. You're going to have that confidence going on the road against the Ravens, on the road against Jacksonville, on the road against the Chiefs. You're going to have that confidence that we took down the 49ers. We can take down anybody. So if there's a game that the Bengals, as of right now, I would assume, at least as of right now, I would assume the odds for the game between the 49ers and the Bengals favor the San Francisco 49ers. And if they don't, I don't know what planet I'm living on. But if the Bengals can win one of those games, can win that game against the 49ers, I think that is going to be a major, major momentum shift in the season for the Cincinnati Bengals.
And Matt, one thing that we forgot to mention is that the Bengals, at least according to years prior, are a second-half season team. They're a second-half team in general. I mean, the second half in games, second half in season, it's crazy how much of a second-half team they are. Take a look 2 years ago. When they went to the Super Bowl, they went 8-3 before they lost Super Bowl 56. They won 8 of 11 games during the backstretch of the season before they lost in the Super Bowl. Last season, they went on a 10-game winning streak. 10-game winning streak before they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship. This is a Bengals team that when they get rolling, and it's shown in times past, it's shown in history. Remember, history will repeat itself. The second half of the season is usually where the Bengals play their best football, which is where you want to be playing your best football. Cincinnati has that going for them. But again, brand new team, brand new season. You have to throw completely out what you did the last 2 years, especially if you want to achieve your goals this season. First step, winning an AFC North title. Next step, winning an AFC title. Next step, winning a title in general. So with that being said, let's take a small break. When we return, we'll talk about more NFL action coming up next, brought to you by McAfee Heating and Air.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, we just went in detail and talked about the AFC North. Of course, the Cincinnati Bengals have won the last 2 AFC North titles. When back-to-back years they went to the AFC Championship, they were the favorites to run away with the AFC North again this season. But after a slow start, some of the favoritism started shifting towards Baltimore. Baltimore losing to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh right now sits first in the division, and every team just separated by within a game. And the AFC North, Matt, it seems like it's anybody's division this point in the season.
Yeah, you get the feeling that it is anybody's. Anybody can win the AFC North right now. I think that when it comes down to it, if I had to pick a team to be on top, I think it'd be the team that is currently in 4th place, just with how crazy everything's been. The Cincinnati Bengals look like the better team right now with what we saw against Arizona and then the Ravens. They looked good against my Browns, but they've also had a couple games this season where they looked lost with what they were able to do on the offensive side. I'm talking about the game against the Colts. I'm talking about the game yesterday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. When the Ravens are able to do what they did against a really, really good Cleveland Browns offense, or Cleveland Browns defense, I should say, and then only put up 10 points against the Steelers and then lose against the Colts in OT, it makes you question if this Ravens team is going to be a contender in the AFC North once the remainder of the season plays out. The other team that I can make an argument for being towards the top is obviously the team that's on top right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers, but you also get that kind of same question marks around the Pittsburgh Steelers as well when it comes down to who they've played so far this season. Is that offense going to continue to play at a high level like we've seen so far at some points through the season, but not throughout the majority of the season? That's why when I brought up who I think is going to be the team on top, I say it's Cincinnati, because right now, Cincinnati looks like the best team of all the teams in the AFC North right now.
You know, Matt, you mentioned a couple of things, and you talked about the Baltimore Ravens, and I'll be the first one to go out and say this, and I've said this for the last couple of weeks. Matt, you may agree with me on this. I think Baltimore, and I don't know if this is necessarily a hot take or not, but I think the Baltimore Ravens are the most overhyped team right now in the AFC. And when it comes to AFC teams, I think they are the most overhyped team. Lamar Jackson is tremendous, but it seems like every single year they have all this hype surrounding them, and then injuries pile up, which obviously you can't control that. But you take a look at, again, that receiving core. They got Odell Beckham Jr. over the offseason. They got Zay Flowers over the offseason. They got Nelson Aguilar. They thought that their problem was fixed. Look how many drop passes they had yesterday. Now, not to mention the fact that, yes, you're going to have bad days. As you're going to have a bad day as a player, you're going to have a bad day as a team, you're going to have a bad day as a group. But it just seems like the Ravens have so much inconsistency around them. When Lamar Jackson's playing great, it seems like the defense is off. When Lamar Jackson's playing great, the running game's off. When Lamar Jackson's off, it seems like that's the day where the rushing attack is great. It just seems like the Baltimore Ravens cannot put every single aspect of the game together. A few weeks ago against the Indianapolis Colts, we ended up seeing the defense played amazing. Offense struggled very, very bad. The offense kicked it into high gear. Special teams let them down. It just seems like the Baltimore Ravens, in a game where they can put all three phases, special teams, offense, and defense, together and play quality football like we've seen at them do points this season, that is a team that can go far in the playoffs. But, so I get the hype that's surrounding the Baltimore Ravens, but I will say this, the inconsistency from the Baltimore Ravens really boggles my mind. And to me, I think the Baltimore Ravens, because of that inconsistency, I think that they are the most overhyped team right now in the AFC.
I can agree with that, just for the main reason that, like you said, if we were to see the Ravens play all 4 quarters at the potential that the Ravens are able to play at, the Ravens are a really good team. But so far this season, I would say probably the only game that we've seen the Baltimore Ravens play at that kind of level was the game against, unfortunately for me, the game against my Cleveland Browns. That was really the only game that we saw pretty much a majority of the game, a majority of both the offense, defense, special teams side, where we saw all of it working really well together for the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, you take a look at their games so far this season. They took down the Texans. It was a pretty good game for the Ravens. 25-9 was the final score of that game. Then 3-point win against the Bengals, 3-point loss against the Colts, 28-3 win against a really good Cleveland Browns defense. You put 28 points on them. And then 17-10, the final score of the game between the Steelers and the Ravens. That's another reason why you brought up the inconsistency for the Baltimore Ravens. It's kind of the case with pretty much every team inside of the AFC North right now. It's inconsistency. That's why I brought up me thinking that the Cincinnati Bengals are probably going to be the team that ends up being on top once all is said and done, because you talked about with the Cincinnati Bengals, when the team gets hot, it's tough to stop them. There's no other way of putting it. Once the Bengals start to get the ball rolling, it's tough to stop them. And you take a look at every other team in the AFC North right now, the Browns, inconsistent, to say the least. The offense has had struggles. The defense has played pretty good pretty much all season. The one blemish is that game against the Ravens. Outside of that, the Browns' defense has been good all season. The offense has been good and bad. The same can be said for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The defense has been pretty good all season long. It's the reason they ended up winning against the Cleveland Browns. And then you take a look at the offense. 6 points in their game, I believe, against the Texans, and then 7 points in a later week. It's tough to say that the Steelers, when it comes, actually, no, it was 6. I think it was 6 against San Francisco, 7 against the Texans. But when it comes down to it, the game against the Texans should have been a win when you go into that game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That should have been either a close win or a win. You shouldn't have been blown out 30-7, I believe was the final score of that game. And then
A lot to a little.
It was a lot to a little.
Easiest way to put it.
The one game that you take a look at it, that with how good all the teams that the Steelers have played so far this season, the game against the 49ers is not a shock, because that's how good San Francisco has looked so far this season. And then you take a look at the Baltimore Ravens. We went into why we think they are currently a question mark, and it's because of the inconsistency. Now looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, they played really good against the Cardinals. You talk about when the team gets hot, they start playing phenomenal football week in and week out. If that game against the Cardinals is a spark for that Cincinnati Bengals team, they are going to start running away with the AFC North. It's if it's a spark for the Bengals, because we talked about their next 5 games on the slate. There's some pretty tough teams in the next 5 games. But if you're the Bengals, if that game is going to be the spark for the Cincinnati Bengals, they're going to start running away with the AFC North.
And you know, Matt, we just talked about the Ravens, and I do think the Ravens have what it takes to win the division. They just have to find consistency. And, Matt, I also will say this. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they fly under the radar, but to me, I think that to be honest, I'm going to go out there and say this. Yes, I know they got blown up by the Texans. Yes, I know they got blown up by the 49ers. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they are cooking something good in Pittsburgh right now. In the next couple of years, that is going to be a very good team as long as Kenny Pickett and some of their other young talent can develop like how we assume that they will. The Pittsburgh Steelers, that defense, insane. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense has always been insane. This season, no different. The offense, when it clicks, is very, very, very good. The question is, what is holding them back? Is it the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada? Is it the second-year quarterback, Kenny Pickett? What's holding the Pittsburgh Steelers back? Because if they can get that offense going, to me, I think it's the offense coordinator. I think it's the play calling. But if they can overcome that, and if they can get that offense playing at not even a top 5 offense in the NFL, if they can get to a top 15 offense in the NFL, that the Pittsburgh Steelers are a dark horse for a wild card spot and could be a dark horse at the division, especially if Cincinnati, Cleveland, Baltimore stay as inconsistent as they have been. I wouldn't be shocked if Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland all stay inconsistent. I would not be shocked to see the Pittsburgh Steelers, if they can get that offense figured out, slide up, and we could be talking about the Steelers late in the season.
And I'll tell you what's going to be interesting with the AFC North is if we see all these teams play inconsistent throughout the year. I'd hate to see this because I'd love to see more than one AFC North team in the postseason, but if we keep seeing the Bengals play inconsistent, if it was just a one-off week for the Bengals against the Cardinals and they go back to struggling on offense this upcoming week against the Seahawks, if the Browns stay inconsistent, if the Steelers stay inconsistent, if the Ravens stay inconsistent, if all these teams stay inconsistent, we're going to see the winner of the AFC North make it into the postseason, and that's going to be the only AFC North team in the postseason. And like I said, I'd rather see 2 AFC North teams make it into the postseason because that means the AFC North is tough competition. But if we keep seeing the inconsistencies like all the 4 teams have been showing so far this year, we are going to see 1 AFC North team in the postseason, and that's it. We're not going to see any more because if we keep seeing the inconsistency, we're going to see all these teams sitting around 500, roughly around 500 probably once the regular season comes to a close. And the reason that that's such an issue is because you've got teams, and you've got the AFC North, or not AFC North, you got the AFC East. You take a look at the top teams in the AFC East. You've got Baltimore, you've got Buffalo. I said Baltimore. You've got Miami. You've got Buffalo. I was thinking Buffalo.
I was
but
going to correct you, but I was waiting for you because I saw the gears turning in your mind.
Here,
Matt.
Buffalo, Miami. Buffalo, Miami right now. You can make an argument that obviously there's still plenty of time to go in the regular season, but Baltimore, Miami are probably going to, or I said Baltimore again, Buffalo, Miami are probably going to be 2 teams.
We talked about the Ravens too much.
We're talking about AFC North. That's why I keep saying Baltimore. But Bills, there we go. Bills, Dolphins. Probably going to see those 2 teams in the postseason. Just with how both of them have looked so far this year, the Bills and the Dolphins are probably going to be teams that are in the postseason. One of the teams obviously winning the AFC East, the other team being probably the 5 or 6 seed when it comes to the wild card. And then you take a look over AFC West. Chiefs look phenomenal. Chargers, their record's not that good, but when it comes down to it, that Chargers team can easily get the season turned around, and they can easily also be a postseason team. So when it comes down to it, you take a look at if the AFC North stays inconsistent for a majority of the season, there's a chance we could see the AFC North winner be the only team in the playoffs, and we don't see any more teams.
Matt, I have to completely agree with you. And you know, Matt, going back to the previous question that we asked, who will run away with the AFC North? That's what we started this segment about 20 minutes ago. 30 like the show.
I already listed the team that I think it's going to be.
And I'm going to agree with you. If that is a spark for the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cincinnati Bengals, I think, can win the AFC North at the end of the season. If that is a spark, and if we can start seeing the Cincinnati Bengals play how we expect to see the Cincinnati Bengals play. If not, I'm going to either... I'm torn because Baltimore, if they find consistency, they're right there in the thick of things. But I also really do love what Cleveland is cooking in Cleveland. I know I use that same term for Pittsburgh, but the Cleveland Browns, that defense has been legit this season. If they can get that offense going, I think that all 4 teams in the AFC North has a chance to run away with the division. We have not yet seen one run away with the division. The favorite in my eyes is Cincinnati, just because they had the experience doing so. We know what the Bengals are capable of, especially looking at years past. If not Cincinnati, I'd have to go with it's a toss-up between Baltimore and Cleveland. I probably would still go with the Baltimore Ravens. I think they can find that inconsistency. I'm not backtracking what I said. I think that they're the most overhyped team right now in the AFC. But even though that they're the most overhyped team right now in the AFC, it doesn't mean that there will be the most overhyped team in the AFC come December.
And yeah, I think when it comes to the AFC North, I think whoever's going to come away on top is going to be the team, whichever team gets traction first. Because we talked about the inconsistency. It's inconsistency for all 4 teams. There's no other way of putting it. But whichever team gets traction first, they're going to be the team on top of the AFC North at the end of the season. Whether it be Cleveland, it might even be the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether it be Baltimore, whether it be the Bengals. Whichever team gets traction and can start moving first, they're going to be the team on top of the AFC North at the end of the regular season.
Absolutely. We're going to take a small break. When we return, we will talk about the National Football League in general. We focus mainly on Ohio. We focus mainly on then the AFC North. We're going to go in and talk about all the other divisions in the AFC and the NFC as well. We'll make our predictions from what we've seen so far this season. That's all coming up next here on Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves.
We welcome you back here to the TKDS Sports Network Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington and our unannounced third host of the show. There is a fly that is circling around the room.
He is annoying.
What should we name him? Well, we have a third co-host here. It's
Get out of here. That's what we should name him. Leave. It will not. Right as you were introing back, it landed on your headset. I'm not even lying to you. It landed on your headset. And it has been.
he just wants to be on camera, man.
He's near you. He's on the bag right now. But he has been occasionally. You guys have probably seen it. You probably see me like move my hand around
like
occasionally. It is
ninjas.
landing on the mic. It's landing near my face. It's landing on my laptop. It needs to leave. That's what it needs to do. I see it right now. It's on your back.
You're gonna
I'm
see
looking
our
right
best
at it.
karate moves.
I want it out of here. If it would just, fly around the room and not go in my face, I am fine
think
with
you
it.
just saw
It
it
landed
fly
on your
over my
headset.
head.
It
Yep.
landed on your headset. If
Oh,
it were to
boy.
leave us alone, it can stay here for as long as it wants. It's landing on us.
Matt, we have a live
It can
audience
leave.
today. It's our first show, live audience.
I don't like the audience. He's annoying me right now.
Oh boy, let's go back into it. Let's talk some more NFL. After this segment, we're going to talk about Major League Baseball. Of course, the Red season ended a couple weeks ago. We're going to get into all of that, and the future is bright for Cincinnati. We're talking about the Major League Baseball playoffs, who we think is the hottest team right now, which plays dividends, especially this late in the season in October baseball. But first, we talked about the Cincinnati Bengals. We touched base a little bit on the Cleveland Browns, not much. We'll talk about them a little bit more next week because remember, they were on a bye week this previous week. They got the 49ers coming up on Sunday. We talked about the AFC North. Now let's talk about the entire league, the AFC and the NFC. Matt, who are some of your sleeper teams? Who are some of the teams that have really surprised you? And to be honest, I'll start us off if you don't mind. A couple teams that really surprised me, the Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, I think they're playing way better than anybody out there expected. And not only that, but the Minnesota Vikings and the Los Angeles Chargers, they surprised me a little bit too, not because they're doing good, but quite the opposite because they're struggling. Remember, those two teams were two teams that were projected to be really, really good this season. They have not.
And yeah, I think if there's a team that is surprising me quite a bit, I'm looking at the Houston Texans, and not just because I'm an Ohio State fan and C.J. Stroud's the quarterback for the Houston Texans, but he's been putting together a pretty good
What
season
a season
so far
He's
this year.
been incredible.
He's been pretty much everything the Texans would have hoped for with their first-round pick. Well, their first-round pick that they had, because their very next pick was Will Anderson. But when it comes down to a quarterback that you want to pick up, or that you pick up, and you end up starting him in his rookie season, and he's able to play at the level that C.J. Stroud has played at so far for the Houston Texans, you cannot be too upset whatsoever as a Texans fan. The other team that you brought up that's kind of surprising a little bit, I would have to easily agree with you on the Minnesota Vikings. 1-4 right now on the season, struggling so far this year. But if there's a team that we were talking about it when we were talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, I know you brought it up. If there's a team that record-wise looks terrible right now, but can easily turn it around, I think it's the Minnesota Vikings. They're 1-4 on the season. They've got one of the passing leaders when it comes to yardage on the season in Kirk Cousins. They've got one of the best passing offenses in the entire NFL, and they are 1-4. You take away those close games, you get the defense going for the Minnesota Vikings. This Vikings team can easily go from a 1-4 team to 5-0 in their next 5 games, turning things around, getting the team to where people expected them to be during the season. This Minnesota Vikings team, it's all going to depend on if they can fix the defense, because the offense, putting up as many yards as they have been so far this season, it's hard to find a team putting up as many offensive yards as the Vikings have and them being a 1-4 team. If the defense finds a way to hold the opponent's offense, the Minnesota Vikings are going to start winning a lot more football games down the stretch than they're going to be losing.
And, take a look at the Minnesota Vikings. They have the Bears coming up next week. That hopefully can be a win for Minnesota. Then they play the 49ers. And we just talked about the San Francisco 49ers. That is a tough team to go up against. Even if they can't, I think the Vikings can pull an upset against San Francisco 49ers, but even if they can't, you look ahead, then they have the Packers, the Falcons, the Saints, and the Broncos. All of those games are very winnable games for the Minnesota Vikings. And Matt, going back to C.J. Stroud, he's completed 61% of his passes this season, just under 1,500 yards, 7 touchdowns. And Matt, here's the most shocking stat: 0 interceptions. 0. And after we saw what C.J. Stroud did in the preseason, I think everybody was starting to write him off and said that he was going to lead the league in interceptions this season. C.J. Stroud said, I'll show you 0 interceptions through 5 games. There's not many more quarterbacks that can say that.
And yeah, how many completions did you say he had?
61%.
61% completion. How many completions on attempts do you know? Because I know that because I saw a stat for it a few weeks ago. It was either after week 3 or week 4. I think it was after week 4. But when it comes to rookie quarterbacks starting, C.J. Stroud has completely torched the record for most completions thrown. It was either most completions or attempts thrown before an interception in the NFL. The closest to him was around, I think the closest to the record was around, or the record before C.J. Stroud this year was around 100 to 120. I think it was passes attempted before an interception was thrown. C.J. Stroud has yet to throw an interception, and like I said, that stat was C.J. Stroud had blown that record out of the water around week 4 time frame. I don't even think it included last week's. So, like I said, you want to talk about a quarterback that you absolutely, if you're the Texans, you are loving that he's the quarterback you picked. The reason I say you're loving that he's the quarterback you picked is because you take a look at some of the other quarterbacks in the NFL right now that are rookies. Obviously, Anthony Richardson's looking pretty good for the Indianapolis Colts, but the player who was drafted before him, Bryce Young, Panthers are 0-5 right now.
And Matt, one thing, you asked me how many attempts has he been able to throw for this season. I don't have the exact number, but I do know in his 5th game yesterday, some point in that game, he threw his 177th pass attempt on the season without an interception. That is the best stretch by a rookie since Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, and I find that ironic because now Dak Prescott is one of the leading quarterbacks in the NFL over the last couple of years when it comes to INTs. So I kind of find that a little ironic.
And yeah, it's funny you bring up Dak Prescott with interceptions. I remember vehemently saying during our fantasy football draft, I'm like, y'all might call me crazy, but I don't think he's going to throw as many interceptions as he did a season ago, as I picked up Dak Prescott in our fantasy football draft. But no, like I said, when it comes to the Texans, if there's a team right now that is really happy with the quarterback that they picked in the draft, it's got to be the Houston Texans, because CJ Stroud has looked really good so far this season for the Houston Texans. And had they gotten one more field goal against Atlanta yesterday, we wouldn't be looking at this team as, man, they're 2-3. They still do have a chance in the AFC South, but you never know. It's still up in the air. We'd be seeing this team at 3-2, and we'd be thinking, man, this team really does have a valid shot at taking the AFC South. And the only reason I say that they don't have a valid shot is because it seems like Tennessee's starting to get things back in rhythm. It looks like the Colts, they're really starting to get things in rhythm too. That's not even talking about what the Jaguars are capable of in the AFC South. So you take a look at the competition that the Texans have in their own division this season. It's tough to say that as of right now, the Texans look like the team to beat in the AFC South, just because of all the other teams that they're going to have to deal with. But definitely a surprise as to what I would assume a lot of people were probably thinking of what the Houston Texans were going to do at this point of the season. I would assume, even myself included, the Texans might be a 1-4, 0-5 team at this point of the season. But they are 2-3 right now, pretty close. Like I said, only lost by 2 to the Falcons yesterday, which the Falcons, another team that you can say is a little bit surprising with how they've done so far this season, because they didn't look good pretty much at all last season. And now they're starting to get things going. But you talk about teams that kind of coming out of nowhere, you got to look at the Houston Texans.
You know, Matt, I also would have said the Detroit Lions, but I expected their success this season. They're 4-1 right now. I expected that, to be honest. I think the Detroit Lions, I said this when we were just doing this show one day a week for over summer. I said this, the Detroit Lions, they're legit this season. They're going to be the real deal. It's time for a break. When we return, we'll shift our focus away from football, and we'll talk about Major League Baseball. October playoffs, the Cincinnati Reds season comes to an end. It's all coming up next in the second hour of Sports Now.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hey!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Hour number 2 of show number 1 of our new format. Once again, we're on 5 days a week. Tomorrow, make sure to tune back in right here on any TKDS social media platform. Matt and I will both be talking about college sports back into the swing of things. We'll be talking mainly about college football. Colorado, University of Colorado, they've definitely been the talk this season so far in college football. We got to touch base on that. The Ohio State Buckeyes, a big win over Maryland. Even though it started out slow, they end up winning big. Kyle McCord still proving he is the real deal. Michigan, number 2 in the entire nation. So that's all coming up tomorrow on Sports Now 4 to 6. Matt, let's shift focus. We've talked football all season, or all show long, I beg your pardon. All season long. It is football season, but all show long, we've talked football. It's also baseball season. And a lot of people forget it's baseball season because where we're from, we live in Southwest Ohio. We have not experienced true October baseball in Southwest Ohio for over a decade. And I say true October baseball because I'm not counting the COVID year. Reds made it in the COVID year. I'm not counting that. True October baseball has not been experienced in over a decade in Southwest Ohio. Matt, the Cincinnati Reds, they came very, very close this season. They took it all the way up to 161 games this year after being eliminated from the playoffs, after losing 100 a season ago. The future is bright for Cincinnati, and you're almost getting a taste of that October baseball coming back to Cincinnati where it belongs.
And yeah, it was tough watching the season slowly crumble away.
It was a slow, painful death.
Heading towards the final few weeks of the season. I had it in my mind that, man, I would love to see the Cincinnati Reds make it into the postseason, but I remembered saying it was probably about roughly a month ago from now. I remember saying that I would absolutely love, because around this time a month ago, we were talking, what teams do we think are going to make it in the National League? What teams do we think are going to be just outside once the regular season comes to a close? And I remember it was right around a month ago from this time when the Reds started sliding out of being in a wild card spot, and they were sitting around that half a game to a game out that we saw roughly 5 teams, it felt like, sitting at for about a month straight. And I hated saying it at the time, but it ended up coming true. I didn't want to put the Reds as one of my teams to make it in just for the main reason that the Reds are going to be the Reds. They're going to find a way to play, and that's one thing that we saw, especially in the later stages of the season. They are going to play to their competition, and they're going to end up losing just one of those few games that they shouldn't lose, and it's going to be what ends up sending them over the rails and sending them out and sending them packing for the regular or for the postseason. They're not going to make it in. The one game I'm pointing at, the 9-0 lead at the end of the third to a loss against the Pirates. That was a tough game, and it felt like that was the last week of the regular season. It felt like that was kind of the nail. That was the nail in the coffin for the Cincinnati Reds season. And I remember seeing the score of that game. I'm like, it's 9-0. I'm gonna. The Reds got this one.
You turn it off. It was on a Saturday, so you go and watch college football. And I think that was the same day, if I'm not mistaken, of the Colorado State football game, which was insane. So I remember I was paying attention to the Reds, and I was like, oh, they got this. Turned it off, went and watched college football, come back, and I'm like, what happened?
Exactly. I had turned on college. I think it was the day of the Colorado State game. But I had turned off the Reds game, went to watch that football game, and I had put my phone on the charger so it wasn't near me. So I couldn't see the updates as the game was going on. But I remember watching the Colorado State game. I'm like, I think my phone's got enough battery. Let me go check in on what the heck happened to the Reds. That's kind of what was going through my head when I saw that happen. It was 9-0 when I put my phone away, stopped watching the game. I'm like, all right, yeah, looks like the Reds are going to win. About half an hour to an hour later, I check on my phone after I had it plugged in. I'm like, all right, let's see this Reds. What's going on? And that was like I said, that was kind of, it felt like the nail in the coffin, the dagger, whichever way you want to put it. But it felt like that's when we shipped away the potential of the Reds making it into the postseason.
Yeah, the 9-0 loss, or the 9-0 lead that came into became a loss, hurt drastically. And, the Reds, though, what a memorable season. All the rookies getting called up. They had the most players across Major League Baseball this season make their MLB debut. And not only that, but a lot of those guys immediately stepped up once they hit the big leagues. We saw Matt McClain. We saw Spencer Steer both step up. We saw Andrew Abbott, Brandon Williamson step up. Ellie De La Cruz stepped up until he went ice cold later on in the season. But the Reds, and especially their young core and the core that they have built, they will be returning the majority of their team next year. I'm not going to say all. Joey Votto's still up in the air, and then you also have some other players as well. But the core of the Reds is returning again next season. And for a while, we haven't been able to say that. The core, this young core for Cincinnati's coming back, and not only that, they are in the same exact situation. I know we talked about the Bengals. I know we said that we're done with NFL football, but I'm bringing it back into it. A couple years ago, when the Cincinnati Bengals went to the Super Bowl, what were they dealing with? House money. They had almost all of their guys on rookie contracts, and we started to see them the next couple of years start investing some of the money that they had because they realized that was their biggest chance to end up winning. They had a lot of they had a lot of young guys on rookie contracts. Same thing with the Cincinnati Reds. They have a very low payroll right now because a lot of these guys are still so young that they're on their first rookie contracts and stuff. Right now is the optimum time right now for the Cincinnati Reds to go and invest. They need to invest in the offseason. We're talking about who they should invest in the offseason coming up later on here in just a couple of minutes. But right now is your prime. It's your prime for success. You have to go and pick up guys right now. You have to go spend that money. You have to go and get guys that can elevate your team to the next level. If the Cincinnati Reds can do that heading into next season, they can be. And I will say this. I will say this. If the Reds spend their money in areas that they need to, if they get the players that they need to, they can be a World Series contender next season. Especially if the development continues for the young guys such as Christian Encarnacion-Strand, Noelvi Marte, Andrew Abbott, Spencer Steer, Matt McClain, Ellie De La Cruz, Brandon Williamson. There's so many young guys that Cincinnati has. Their development continues. They spend the money that they need to. We could see the Reds making a deep October run next season.
And yeah, for the Cincinnati Reds, it's going to come down to if they decide to make those improvements in the offseason. And if the Reds do decide to make those improvements in certain areas that they had a lot of struggles with this season, this Reds team can be a team that makes it to the World Series next year. It's the question of, are they going to go out and spend some money in the offseason? Are they going to go out and get some players that are really needed? The reason I'm not saying what position is because, like you mentioned, we're going to talk about it here. We're going to talk about it here in a little bit. But you take a look at the core of players that the Cincinnati Reds have right now. Such a young team. And they were a few games out of the postseason. You get, in the offseason, you either get a leader or you get some players to fix the issues that you had on the season. The position that I'm looking at, the position that I keep talking about in my head right now, you fix this position, you win 5 to 10 more games. With how the Reds played this season, you get this position, you win 5 to 10 more games almost guaranteed this year. What do those 5 to 10 games do? Those put you in the conversations of winning the NL Central, but they also guarantee you a spot in the postseason. So if the Reds go ahead, spend some money, get some players that they really need, and if you're a Reds fan, you probably know what I'm talking about. If they spend money and get some much needed players, this Cincinnati Reds team is definitely going to make it into the postseason next year. Depending on, well, I say definitely going to, as long as they don't get injured. This Reds team, if they spend some money in the offseason, this Reds team can easily be a postseason team next year. No doubt in my mind.
I completely agree with you, and I back that statement 100% of the way. What Cincinnati was able to do this season was insane. I mean, I think their over-under at the very beginning of the year was 67.5 games, if I'm not mistaken.
I think when I had looked during preseason, it was 65.5 wins.
65.5. So it's somewhere in that mid to high 60s range, more mid-range than anything else. And the Reds surpassed that by, if it was 65, 17 games, if it was 67, 15 games. I mean, what the Reds were able to accomplish this season was absolutely incredible. It was incredible what the Cincinnati Reds were able to do this season. And I think that when you look at what they did, when you look at what you can improve on, just as we mentioned, this is a team that can make a deep postseason run next season long. Those positions where they can upgrade, who they can upgrade with, that's coming up next. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Folks, just another reminder, we are live in chat today, so make sure to leave all your comments and some good news, any critiques on the show, and anything you want us to possibly touch base over. So once again, we are live in chat. Jackson Lycap alongside Matthew Pennington. About 40 minutes left here in our first show of the new format, but Matt, unlike previous times, we don't have to wait till Saturday to do a show. We wait now less than 23 hours to be right back here talking college sports. Matt, let's go into it. We were just talking about the Cincinnati Reds. We recapped their incredible season, what they were able to accomplish. What do the Cincinnati Reds need to do in the offseason to ensure that they are a playoff team and a possible World Series contender?
Well, if you're the Reds, you might have picked up as to what I was alluding to, what the Reds needed to improve on during our last 15 minutes. But if the Reds go out during the offseason, they need to pick up a few good arms in pitching. And if the Reds pick up those few arms in pitching, or even if it's just, I would say 2 decent arms could easily make this Reds team a 5 to 10 plus win, more win team, I should say.
Now, are you talking starting rotation or bullpen?
I think you have to look at both if you're the Reds. You had moments in the season where your starting pitching, you didn't really seem like there were many issues with the starting pitching. And there were also times in the season where it looked like the bullpen wasn't really having many issues when it came to who they had in the bullpen coming in the later stages of games. But then you also had games where the starting pitching had some struggles. The bullpen had some struggles as well. So if you're the Reds, if you can get a really good starting arm, a really good relief arm, I think that would easily get the Reds another 5 wins on the season. But I would say with the amount of injuries that we saw to the Reds this past season, I think starting pitching would probably be more where I would look if you're the Cincinnati Reds, because it felt like there were a little more struggles when it came to the starting pitching than there was with relief pitching on the season. And then, like I said, the amount of times we saw pitchers not able to start because of injuries last year, that's something that if you have a couple more arms on the roster, you can have one of your top guys. If you have a few more decent arms, you can have one of your top guys go down, and you're still going to have another arm that you can swing into the rotation and is still going to be a phenomenal pitcher for your team.
You know, Matt, I agree 100% of the way that I agree 100% with what you just said. There were times in the season where it seemed like the Reds were overusing their all-star closer, Alexis Diaz. It seemed like there were times in the season where they were also overusing their setup, Lucas Sims. They need a little bit more consistency in the bullpen. I liked what the bullpen did this season. The bullpen was a lot better this season than what it's been in years past, but you're 1 to 2 tremendous relievers away from, just as you mentioned, making the playoffs this season. That way, you're not overusing Alexis Diaz. That way, you're not overusing Lucas Sims. Now you can spread it out. And I will say this, TJ Antone coming back from his second Tommy John surgery. Hopefully he's healthy and he'll be back in all of next year, hoping for a great year, successful year for TJ Antone. I think he has potential to be that guy that the Reds need. I will also say this, the Reds, they're in a win-now situation. You don't bank on TJ Antone being that guy. You go utilize free agency, and you get that guy. And if TJ Antone ends up being that guy, great. You got more depth of the bullpen. The starting pitching was very inconsistent this season. We saw Hunter Green throw some of the best games out of any pitcher in Major League this season, but then we also saw him throw some of the worst. You could say the same with Graham Ashcraft. Andrew Abbott had his off days. We'll say this, Nick Lodolo will be back next season, but Lodolo, as we know, he's had a lot of injuries so far in his career. Ashcraft spent a lot of time on the IL this season, so did Hunter Green. The Reds, they need to go. I love their starting five. When you take a look at their starting five of Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Graham Ashcraft, you have Brandon Williamson you can add into that. You have Andrew Abbott you can add into that. And then especially some of their draft picks that they were able to pick up, as the fly's actually now on the microphone. Our third host is making an appearance. Going back to what I was saying, though, when you look at the Reds starting five this season, that's a very great rotation. I love that rotation. But name a point in the season. I don't think there was a point this season where you had all 5 of your best pitchers at the same time in your rotation. There was no point this season. Nick Lodolo went down in May with an injury. Andrew Abbott got pulled up in June. The potential for the top 5 and your top 5 starters in your starting rotation for Cincinnati is crazy good. It's insane. It's through the roof. Their ceiling is so high. The question is, can they all stay on the field and can they all stay in that rotation at the same time? It's baseball. It's not going to happen. I would love for it not to happen. You never want to wish an injury upon a player, but it's a sport. And pitching definitely takes some wear and tear, not just on your arm, but your entire body. It's bound to happen. Reds, what they need to do, I would love to personally see them go sign a starting pitcher, 1 or 2 starting pitchers. And I'd like to see one of them that is durable. And I'd also like to see one of them that it doesn't have to be an ace. It doesn't have to be a guy that'll go out there and pitch on opening day. But I'd like to see a top-end rotation guy. I'd like to see a guy who is your second or third pitcher in that rotation. You know, Hunter Green being your ace, that's great. You signed him to a 7-year deal. He has earned that. He's earned that term, your ace pitcher. You don't need to go spend big bucks on an ace. You do need to go sign a good high-end starting pitcher who can be your number 2 or number 3 guy. Another position I think that the Reds really, really need because, again, Matt, we talk about consistency in the starting rotation. There was a lot of inconsistency also in the batting lineup as well. In the batting order, we'd see the Reds one day strike for 13 runs, the next day strike for 0 with 1 hit. There was a lot of inconsistency for the Reds in their batting order. I will also say this, it's bound to happen. Look how many rookies they had. It is definitely bound to happen, but because of how many young players you have to find a way to combat that. And the way you can combat that is I would love, and I mean love, to see a power bat who plays in the outfield hitting 3 or 4 every single day for Cincinnati. A power bat in the outfield who can bat middle of the order every single day for Cincinnati, a veteran, mind you, who can bring a spark to the team and take some pressure off some of the young guys. That will go a mile. That will go a long way for that Cincinnati batting order as well.
And yeah, I remember you've talked about this to me a few different times, talking about that power bat in the outfield that the Reds would really, really love to have.
I'd love to see Juan Soto.
Yeah,
I know that's probably not going to happen, but I'd love to see Juan Soto in Cincinnati.
That was the player you kept talking about, but
I know it's not going to happen, but
I see
a man can dream, I guess.
I see both of those as things that obviously going into next season, you'd love to see the Reds find a way to try to get both of those on their roster going into next season. But for me personally, I think one issue is a little more glaring than the other, and I think that's the whole pitching rotation.
I'd agree.
Obviously, if you can get both, that would be amazing.
And they got the money to. They have the money to.
If you're able to get both, a few more arms for the rotation or a few more arms for the bullpen, and then also get that power bat in the outfield, this Reds team is going to go from the roughly 82 win team that we saw this season to probably a 90 to 95 plus win team next year.
And Matt, one thing that's great about baseball, unlike other sports, in basketball, you can buy in and get some star players that automatically push your team over the top. Same thing with football. In baseball, it's not really like that. The New York Yankees had one of the highest payrolls this season, and they missed the playoffs. They finished below 500. So that's the great thing about baseball is it doesn't matter your payroll. It's baseball, and that's why I personally believe baseball is the greatest sport out there. And, Matt, we've talked about players that Cincinnati can sign, and I agree with you. Starting pitching, I think that is more of a glaring hole for Cincinnati that they need to go out and fix, but I'd love to see them get a power bat in the outfield, some starting pitching. And, again, Matt, I said Juan Soto. A man can dream. A man can dream. I will also say this, though. It doesn't have to be Juan Soto. Just somebody who can come into Great American Ballpark. It's a hitter's ballpark and contribute.
And yeah, you talk about the Yankees having one of the highest payrolls and whatnot. The one thing that you also have to love, obviously, this team not going to make it as far as they have the past few seasons. But in the past few seasons, I wouldn't say it's cheap as in the owners are cheap, but when it comes to the overall salaries of players, it was one of the cheapest rosters in the entire MLB.
Tampa Bay.
Yes, I'm talking the Rays, and they were a World Series team for the past few years. Like I said, they're not going to make it to the World Series this year. They're already knocked out of the postseason, but they were one of the cheapest teams in the MLB, and they were making World Series runs. It's another reason you got to love baseball.
We're going to take another break. We'll take a 2-minute break with these ads from the TKDS Sports Network and McAfee Heating and Air. When we return, we'll continue to talk Reds baseball. Of course, Joey Votto, he's open to a return. He wants to play at least one more year. And the whole Jonathan India situation, that's coming up next on the TKDS Sports Network and Sports Now.
let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help. Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi!
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help. Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Final 30 minutes of the show. Jackson Lightcap with Matthew Pennington, and we are talking Cincinnati Reds baseball. Of course, just mentioned a couple days ago, Joey Votto, he is open for a return.
I would love to see Joey Votto back with the Reds next year, but the way I would want to see it happen is the Reds not spending too much money to get him back next year. That's what I would love to see with Joey Votto coming back to the Reds, just for the main reason that he's been with Cincinnati for so long. When you think of the Cincinnati Reds, you think of Joey Votto. He's one of the players that comes to your mind when you think of the Cincinnati Reds. I would hate to see his last year not be with the Cincinnati Reds, but also if it's going to cost Cincinnati a ton, part of me thinks that maybe we shouldn't have him back on the team.
I think this is what you need to do if you're Cincinnati. I don't think there's a way you can bring Joey Votto back to be an everyday player. I don't think that it's Christian Encarnacion Strand's job now. And, if he fails, you got Noah V. Marte. You have Spencer Steer. You have a lot of options now at first place. You cannot rely on Joey Votto being your everyday first baseman. And I love Joey Votto. He's done so much for Cincinnati. He has been one of my favorite players growing up. But when you're looking at a business, a 200 hitter over the last couple of years does not make sense for a team that's trying to win. But I will say this. There's a club option. If you pick up that club option, it's $20 million. If you don't pick it up, there's a $7 million buyout. What I would love to see Cincinnati do, don't pick up the club option, do the $7 million buyout, and then you re-sign him back on a cheaper deal, $3 to $5 million for a one-year deal. Therefore, he has a farewell tour. He's able to finish his career in Cincinnati. And not just that, but you can't tell me that he still can't contribute to the team. He knows Cincinnati. He knows the players. He knows the culture that's built. If you can bring him back as a platoon role where he's playing 2 days a week, he's a bench bat, meaning he can come off, pinch hit, and he plays about 2 days a week, whether it's DHing or in the field. If you can bring him back under those circumstances, I think it's a 100% go for it. It's a familiar face. The players in the locker room love him. You bring him back, one-year deal, but you also have to make sure that he knows that it's not his starting job anymore. He'd be a platoon role. And as long as he's willing to accept that, I have no animosity of bringing Joey Votto back to the 5-1-3.
And the other reason I would love to see Joey Votto still being with the Reds is because you talked about the 200 batting average not being that good, potentially having him be more of a platoon guy. But the other thing that Joey Votto has done well with this young Cincinnati Reds team is him being a leader
Yes.
for all these young players.
Will Benson comes to mind.
Exactly. You take a look at what Joey Votto was able to do when it came to helping Will Benson. Earlier on in the season, Benson couldn't hit anything at the plate. He went, talked with Joey Votto for a little bit. Joey Votto tried helping him a little bit with his swing, tried to see if there were some things that Will Benson wanted to do when it came to changing his swing. And then we saw Will Benson pick up steam. I believe Will Benson was like 3 for 27 or something along those lines, 5 for 27 throughout the
I think
beginning.
it was less. I think it was like 2 for 27, if I'm not mistaken.
Throughout the beginning of his tenure with the Cincinnati Reds last year.
Quite a bit of strikeouts, too.
And then he had a long conversation with Joey Votto. Joey Votto helped out Will Benson with his swing, helped him out when it came to his confidence at the plate as well. And then Will Benson started going on that little bit of a tear we saw him go on in the middle, about roughly around early to midway through the season. That's just one small example of Joey Votto being a leader for this young team. And that would be one of the reasons why I would love to see Joey Votto back in a Reds uniform for next year, because the leadership that he brings to this team, and the other thing that we've talked about, and he's brought it up himself, this was one of the most fun years he's had playing baseball in Cincinnati. So why would he, first of all, why would he not want to come back to this young team if it's not for as much money as you would expect Joey Votto to get in a year, but just the leadership aspects that Joey Votto brings to the table, the fact that he said this was one of the most fun years of baseball he's ever played in his career, I think those kind of entice Joey Votto to go back to the Cincinnati Reds for maybe not as much money as a player with the name Joey Votto would be getting going to another team.
Yeah, I think that bringing him back makes sense, but you have to do it the right way. You cannot bring him back with a $20 million contract, because then that everything we talked about in our last segment about how can you spend your money in the offseason, that goes to waste if you bring him back on a $20 million contract. Bring him back, $3 to $5 million deal, 1-year deal, farewell tour to for Cincinnati. He gets to finish his career as a Red, and not only that, but like you said, the leadership that he'll be able to implement in some of your younger core, I think would be absolutely tremendous. I'd love to see Joey Votto back in Cincinnati, but it's got to be feasible for both sides. Matt, there was also a lot of other controversy circling the Reds' second baseman, Jonathan India, and I think down the stretch of the season, a lot of that controversy started going away. A lot of people said that they should ship him off in the offseason. And then remember, he was injured. He was hurt. That team was missing their leader, and that's when they ended up losing quite a bit of games. Late August into early September, he came back. They started winning games. I don't think, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong here. I want to hear your opinion on this too. I don't think there's any way you can afford to get rid of Jonathan India this offseason.
I don't think so, because I can agree with you on that, just because, like you mentioned, when it came down to the Reds winning compared to the Reds losing, there was a little bit of a factor involved in that being Jonathan India, but Jonathan India is still a young player. But we talk about the leadership for Joey Votto. There's another player on that roster that also brings a ton of leadership to this team, and that's Jonathan India. And the reason I bring up the fact that he's a young player,
it's only his third year in the league.
Exactly. He's such a young player, but he already has that big of a voice in the Reds organization. And the reason I bring up the fact that he's a young player and he's the leader of this team, but you also have to take a look at all the other players that are going to be on the Reds roster next year. They're a lot younger when it comes to their time in the league than Jonathan India is. But when it comes down to it, when you have a team as young as the Cincinnati Reds are going to be next year, the one piece that some teams we've seen be super young, not have a lot of success, they don't have that figurehead to lead them throughout the season. We saw struggles for the Cincinnati Reds when Jonathan India wasn't out there with his team. There were times where he was out there. He was in the lineup. The Reds started winning some games. Not saying that it was only Jonathan India is the reason the Reds won all those games, but when you have that figurehead that is helping the team as much as they are when it comes to the leadership aspect. And if the team's down in the dumps, they're in the slumps, they're not feeling good about themselves. Players like Jonathan India, players like Joey Votto will change the mindset of all these young players, because when you're a younger player, you'll have it in your mind that, man, we just, like, going back to the game that the Reds were up 9-0 and ended up losing to the Pirates. If that happened earlier on in the season, the Reds, with how young they were, or how young they are, could have easily got it in their minds that, man, we should have won that game, but we lost it. This is terrible. We're not that good of a team. You have those figureheads that know that this happens. It happens in baseball. Baseball's a game where, I mean, you and I have talked about it time in and time out. Anything can happen on a given night in baseball.
That's what makes it so great.
It doesn't matter what team you are. It doesn't matter if you're the Rockies or if you're the Braves. Anything can happen on any given night in baseball. And if you have those leaders on your team that when you have one of those nights where everything seems like it's against you, you cannot get anything going, it can really turn down the mental fortitude of younger players. If you have those leadership roles on your team, like we've seen with Jonathan India, like we've seen with Joey Votto, that can turn a team from one night getting blown out and not able to do anything when it comes to batting and just struggling on the mound, getting it in their minds that, man, that was bad. We didn't look good. We're not doing good right now. If you have those leader heads in the team, they can take a night like that to the very next night the Reds win 13-5 or something along those lines. That's what Joey Votto and Jonathan India, as leaders and figureheads for the Reds team, bringing them back is only going to help this Reds team next season.
And, you look at the positions, and obviously the middle infield is crowded for Cincinnati. Of course, you have Matt McLain. You have Ellie De La Cruz. You have Noelvi Marte. He's more third baseman, but you also have Spencer Steer, who could play second and third. Fortunate for Steer, he can also play the outfield. He's the ultimate utility player, by the way. I love Spencer Steer. That's the type of ball player. I want 26 guys on my team just like Spencer Steer, But so, yes, the middle infield's crowded, but it's a 162-game season. You're telling me that, especially with the designated hitter now in the National League, you're telling me that there's no room for Jonathan India? It's a 162-game season. You will find room in those 162 games. Not to mention the fact that, remember Matt McLain? He went down late in the season, missed the entire month of September. He went down late in the season. Could you imagine what the Reds would have done if they didn't have Jonathan India or players around that depth around him to step up and fill that gap? I mean, they would have been eliminated from the playoffs a lot quicker. That's why you cannot afford to lose players. You want to keep your core. You have them under contract. You keep them. That's I think what the Reds need to do with Jonathan India. I will say this: if a deal comes, business is business. If a deal comes and it benefits you, and there's no way you can turn it down, I'm not saying he's an asset you can't touch. I'm just saying I'd like to see him in a Cincinnati Reds, and I'm not in a Reds uniform next year. I'm not opposed to seeing him next season. I think the Reds need him.
And yeah, that's another thing that, at least when it comes to, you talked about Ellie De La Cruz going a little bit, when it comes to his production, it fell off a cliff at the later part of the season.
Very bad slump.
And I'm not saying that it's the main reason for it, but the one thing that the Reds didn't really do much once Ellie De La Cruz was on the roster was give him a night's rest. That's not something we really saw Ellie De La Cruz have much of in his entire season with the Cincinnati Reds. Not saying that if you took him out, say a Wednesday night before you had a Thursday night break, not saying that you would have had Ellie De La Cruz go back to his coming into the Reds or going into the major league form, but you give a player a night's rest one night before a Thursday night break too. That can really help a player when it comes to getting themselves ready for the next series that they've got. And then it can also, if they're in a slump, it can calm down their mind as well.
And Matt, I love how you mentioned that. That is, you said that you think it will play a factor. I think it 100% does. Matt, you and I were both baseball players. We know that when you're tired, when you're playing every day, when you're exhausted, what do you do at the plate? You get lazy. You don't have to be a lazy baseball player to get in situations in baseball games where you're lazy. You create bad habits. When you don't have any rest, you're at the plate, you create bad habits. And then you're just digging yourself into a bigger and bigger and bigger hole. I think that's what Elly De La Cruz did this season. We've seen what he can do. He's only 21 years old. He's going to be phenomenal next year. There's no doubt in my mind. But just as you mentioned, having that extra middle infielder there, that will save Elly De La Cruz. That'll save Jonathan India. That'll save Matt McLain. It just makes your team all around much better and more sustainable as well, more durable for the full 162-game season, and what we hope more come October. It's time for a break. Speaking of October, we'll talk October playoffs, Major League Baseball. We'll talk about all the other teams still alive in the postseason. That's coming up next, and then we will wrap up our Monday show.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Matt, we only have a little bit left on in the show, and I just want to say, first off and foremost, what an amazing first show. Other than the fly that's flying around, other than some of the difficulties we had at the very beginning, I'm super excited. I'm super excited to spend 5 days a week with you doing this show, and now 6 days actually a week, because we'll be doing Friday night football and game of the weeks on Friday night. So it brings us back to our old elementary school days where we'd see each other every single day after school, weekends included.
Yeah, it does. Especially I would say more middle school, because during middle school we would play backyard football Saturdays and Sundays. It was pretty much every single day of the week we were around each other doing something. So
I mean, we would have, we had our own talk show without even having a talk show. But anyway, Matt, let's go into Major League Baseball in the playoffs. I will say this: how about the wild card teams and some of the lower seeds so far in the NL and ALDS? They have taken the league by storm. Arizona took down the Los Angeles Dodgers. They lead that series 1-0. Philadelphia Phillies ended up taking down the Atlanta Braves. They lead that series 1-0. Texas Rangers, the 5 seed, 2 wins over Baltimore. They're up 2-0 on the Orioles. And then the Twins and the Astros are tied at a game apiece. What about some of those lower seeds? Matt, I will say this. The Philadelphia Phillies, they flew under the radar all season long. We talked about them quite a bit on this show. They were below 500 for quite a while. They turned it on after the All-Star break, and they were the hottest team in baseball entering the postseason. They won 8 out of their last 10 games. And again, I'll say this, the Philadelphia Phillies were and still are the hottest team in Major League Baseball right now. And you could tell how much the city of Philadelphia loves the Philadelphia Phillies, especially in the postseason. They're up 1-0 on the Braves. If they can get to 2-0, I think that the Philadelphia Phillies, they're going at it. They want revenge from last year's loss in the World Series to the Houston Astros. The Philadelphia Phillies have what it takes. They have the momentum. They're the hottest team in baseball right now to win it all. And if you ask me, out of any of those 8 teams remaining, who's going to win it all? I love the Atlanta Braves. I love what they've done all season long. I'm going with the hot hand. And the Philadelphia Phillies, they have the hot hand. They're playing the best baseball right now. That's what you want in October. You and I both know once you hit October and the Major League Baseball playoffs, it doesn't matter if you're a 6 seed or a 1 seed. It doesn't matter if you're the worst team in the playoffs through the regular season or the best team through the regular season. It's October baseball, and anything can happen. I love what the Phillies are doing right now.
And yeah, the one thing that's also very interesting, and it's definitely going to spice things up. You talk about the Phillies series, the Diamondbacks series. Those are both an NL East series between the top 2 teams in the NL East, and then the NL West as well. Diamondbacks and Dodgers both NL West, and then Phillies Braves both NL East. When it comes down to postseason, we've talked about it. It happens a lot with football, especially in high school, especially in college, especially in the NFL. Well, not much in college because the playoffs for college are only 4 teams make it in, and usually they don't like scheduling 2 Big Ten teams or 2 SEC teams in the same game to start off the first round of the college football playoff. But in the NFL, it happens all the time. In high school, it happens all the time. When you have an in-conference or in-division, whichever way you want to put it, when you have an NL East versus NL East, NL West versus NL West, NL Central versus NL Central, American League, it doesn't matter where you're at. If you have an NL East versus NL East, NL West versus NL West, crazy things can happen. And so far, obviously, it was only one game in the series so far that's been played out. But those are the types of series where anything can happen. Obviously, Phillies Braves, Diamondbacks Dodgers, both of those games played tonight. I believe, if I'm not mistaken right now, it says Phillies and Braves. They're warming up right now, getting ready to play that game. So it's safe to say craziness is probably going to happen in those 2 series. But one thing that I also want to talk about, you talked about the Texas Rangers being the 5 seed. What chaos happened? What chaos happened in the AL West for the last game of the season to push the Houston Astros from, they were going to be the 5 seed, pushing them from the 5 seed to having a bye in the first series.
The 2 seed.
To the 2 seed. They didn't even have to play in the first round of the postseason. That was one thing, because we were talking about, in the later stages when it came down to playoff hunts on this show, we talked about some of the American League. We mainly focused on the National League because of the Cincinnati Reds, how close that wild card run was in the National League. But we did eventually start flipping it over to the American League because there was also Seattle, the only team that was outside looking in that had a chance of making it in. They missed out by a game. But the craziness in the last week of the season, Texas, I believe they were up 2 or so games on the Astros, 3 games on the Mariners, to go from the team that pretty much the entire season, Texas was on top of the American League West.
Until September, and then it was a little bit back and forth.
Then it got close, and
was,
then they got another little bit of a lead, and then then it came down to the tiebreak.
I remember for a while, Texas, who was in control of the playoff spot from opening day until I think it was like mid-August. It was game 133. They then fell out of the playoff picture. They were there for 2 games, then they jumped back in, then they fell back out. It was a process. It's baseball. That's the best thing I could say. That's the best description I can give. It's baseball. And that is why baseball is so great. It's chaotic, especially here in October. And Matt, if you told me that all of the lower 3 out of 3 of these 4 series, the lower seed would be up in the standings. Granted, it's only 1-0 on the NL side, but I probably would have laughed in your face. I would have laughed. It's what we've seen so far already in this October. And wild card, for example, all 4 wild card series ended in a 2-0 sweep. That is the first time that has ever happened in Major League Baseball history because, well, yeah, we've had sweeps in the wild card. Yeah, we've had that. But remember, the wild card was one and done. It was 1 game and done. They didn't go to the 3-game format and extended the playoffs until last season. So, first time that's ever happened in Major League Baseball history. It's been a chaotic season. It's been a chaotic postseason, and you know we're only in the divisional series. We still have championship series and the World Series as well.
And yeah, right now, if I had to pick a team out of everybody that's still left,
Join me.
The thing is,
Pick my answer.
I'm looking at the Phillies just because
Great minds think alike.
we saw what Washington did when they won the World Series. They looked horrible through the first half of the season.
Philadelphia did the same thing last season, and they obviously they didn't win the World Series. They were the runner-up. They lost it, but they won the NL pennant, and they were 7 games below 500 last season. They fired their coach in the middle of May last season. When was the last time you've seen a team fire their head man? It's not a coach in baseball, it's a manager. When was the last time you've seen, I'll say later because I want to extend this to all of the major sports as well. When was the last time you've seen a team fire their head coach, head manager, their leader, middle of the season, and then went and won their conference and almost won a title for whatever sport it was?
The only
doesn't happen.
The only team that comes to mind, and they didn't win their conference, and they didn't win the AFC championship game. But I look at Cleveland with the season that they had, where they fired their head coach earlier on. Greg Williams came in, and the Browns looked pretty good after he came in, but still
Didn't get a conference title.
exactly
Didn't get an
wasn't-
NL pennant. It doesn't happen. It
Exactly.
doesn't happen. So what the Phillies have been able to do over the last couple of years, it's been incredible.
But yeah, if there was a team right now that I would probably have to side with, especially if they can take down the Braves. If the Phillies take down it doesn't have to be a sweep. If the Phillies take down the Braves, they are my team to win the World Series right now. If they lose to the Braves,
Then
I would-
obviously
if-
they're not going to win.
obviously
the
they're
World
not obviously
Series.
they're not going to win the World Series, but if I had to pick a team and Philly got knocked out, I'd be looking at the Astros as a potential team to win the World Series because we talked about them being a few games out of winning the American League West, and then last few games of the season, they were able to claw their way in, be a 2 seed. They got a first round bye in the postseason. They are 1-1 against the Twins right now, but if there is a team outside of the Phillies I'm looking at the Astros. But right now, I think the team that, like I said, especially if they take down the Braves, I'm looking at the Phillies right now.
You know, Matt, I think whoever wins the Phillies-Braves series is winning it all. I think it's either going to come down to Philadelphia or Atlanta. I like the NL East, and that will take us to the end of our first show on the new 5-day-a-week format. Well, Matt, we said this earlier in the show. We don't have to wait all the way till Saturday to do our Friday night recap show. We're live tomorrow, 4 to 6. Make sure to join us as we talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Big Ten, how that conference is shaping up. Penn State's putting together a really nice season. So is Michigan as well. That's always been expected. We're take a look at some of the conference changes, of course, some of the out-of-conference games, and some of the schedules for the Big Ten and SEC all coming up in future years. Talk about the Colorado hype. It's our college day on Tuesday. That's all coming up on any TKDS social media page tomorrow from 4 to 6. Alongside Matthew Pennington, our engineer Kevin Fowler, I'm Jackson Lycap. We'll talk to you then in 22 hours.